Hi everyone, this is Father Warner D'Souza from St. Jude Church, Maladies. The Gospel of today is that of Wednesday in the 5th week of Lent. It is John chapter 8 verses 31 to 42. Let me read that for you. Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying, 'You will be made free'?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are descendants of Abraham, yet you look for an opportunity to kill me because there is no place in you for my word. I declare what I have seen in the Father's presence. As for you, you should do what you have heard from the Father." They answered him, "Abraham is our father." Jesus said to them, "If you were Abraham's children, you would be doing what Abraham did. But now you are trying to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I have heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are indeed doing what your father does." They said to him, "We are not illegitimate children. We have one Father, God is our Father." Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me, for I come from God, and now I am here. I did not come of my own accord, but he sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. My dear sisters and brothers, this is really a classic case of catching the bull by its tail. And what happens when you catch a bull by its tail? Well, you get bullshit. I know it's not a great way to begin a gospel reflection, but really, when you look, it reflects the silliness of the Jews. And this is getting quite evident in their discussion with Jesus. Jesus is doing some very straight talking with the Jews. And they are on an emotional trip to nowhere, talking about Abraham and that they are not slaves, etc., etc. Therefore, by the end of chapter 8, the two, Jesus and the Jews, will be clearly on divergent paths in their understanding. Jesus finally will utter those great words, "Before Abraham was, I am." And with one swift move, he will declare to the Jews that he is God. What are the Jews going to do? Well, they're only going to hear a blasphemer. And so they're going to pick up stones to stone him. Let me recap a little bit about what happened yesterday. You could see yesterday that Jesus reached a point of frustration in his discussion with the Jews. We know that he says to them, he says, "Why do I speak to you at all?" But hardly had he finished venting his anger, you will notice that Jesus once again gives them another shot. He gives them another chance. He tries to convince them to rethink what they were thinking all over again. Isn't it amazing that really Jesus never gives up on us? It's very often that we give up on him. He continues to draw us to open our mind. And today he's drawing us to open our mind to the effects of sin in our life. The invitation of Jesus is to those who truly wish to be his disciples. He says very clearly, "Remain in my word. Let my word find a home in you." It is the word of truth that will set us all free. You will notice that even when Jesus battled with Satan, he battled him with the word against the lies of Satan. So what is God really saying? He's saying, "It is my word." Jesus is saying, "It is my word that will preserve you from sin." Sin, my dear friends, enslaves us, period. There is no other way of looking at it. We know this in verse 34. We become slaves to sin. And sin also does something else. It not only enslaves us, but deprives us of a permanent place in God's house. We are told this in verse 35. It enslaves us, it deprives us of a permanent place in God's house. And Jesus in verse 35 says, everyone has a place in his house. It is we who choose by our decisions not to enter that. St. Paul also tells us that God is creating for us a home in heaven, a home that he creates with his own hands. It is a permanent home, St. Paul says. So Jesus Christ wants to welcome us into his house, into the Father's house. What keeps us away from entering this house? It is sin. And really that sin very often is reflected in one word. It's simply our ego, where we put ourselves before we put God. I comes before God. Look at the word sin itself. How do you spell it? S, I is in the center, and then N. Jesus is inviting us to move from sin, as he says today, into being sons of God. And we have to replace that I of myself with O for others. And that's how we move from sin to the relationship with the Son. This is where the Jews, many of whom who were believers of Jesus, now choose to part company with him. Why? Because for them, they believe that they are not slaves to sin, even though they were. They begin to claim an ancestry that goes back to Abraham himself, an ancestry, as they call it, of freedom. But were they really free? Not at all. Look at the evidence itself. They were enslaved in Egypt. They are right now having a discussion with Jesus in the temple during the celebration of the Feast of the Tabernacles or the Feast of the Booths, a reminder that they once were enslaved in Egypt. And even more, politically they were ruled by the Romans. They were not free at all. In fact, at the trial of Jesus, they themselves admit, we have no king but Caesar. It's very important. The Jews claim that they have Abraham as their father, that they are children of Abraham. But this claim can be as hollow as our claim when we say that we are disciples of Jesus Christ. Our claim can also be as hollow as their claim. Why do I say this? Because faith, my dear sisters and brothers, is not a privilege. Faith is a responsibility. We must act responsibly with our faith and not claim privileges from Jesus, as many of us think that we ought to or we should. The Jews claimed privileges. What did that lead them to? It led them to blood on their hands. They chose to murder Jesus. We read this in verse 37. They are out to get his blood. Christian discipleship is not a matter of convention. It's a matter of conviction. Let me explain this. Convention is, my grandfather was a Christian, my parents were Christians, I am a Christian, and therefore that's the way the cookie crumbles. But really, Jesus is calling us to be his disciples not by convention, but by conviction. It is our personal desire to follow Jesus, our personal no to Satan, our personal yes to Jesus. And so I need to begin to act like a true Christian who practices his faith by conviction. Conviction, not convention. And this is how every disciple should live their life. Have a blessed day, and God bless you all.